Commander Dale Voss had not slept in 4 days. He stood at the observation window of Ironhold Station and looked down at Earth. The planet was still turning. That was the worst part. It looked exactly the same from up here. Blue and white and quiet, like nothing had happened. Like 7 billion people had not died in 14 weeks. He pressed one hand flat against the cold glass and made himself look. Behind him, the station groaned. Ironhold was old, built for a crew of 300, and now it held 41 people in corridors designed for 10 times that number. The empty sections had been sealed off. Voss had ordered that on day 2. Too many open doors, too many dark rooms that used to have people in them. He turned away from the window. The main deck smelled like burnt wiring and recycled air. With 2 of his engineers, a man named Garrett Cole and a woman named Pat Sully, were arguing quietly over a coolant panel near the far wall. Sully had her sleeves rolled up in grease on both arms. Cole kept shaking his head. Whatever they were debating, neither of them looked up when Voss walked past. They were focused. That was good. Focused people stayed alive. Voss stopped at the communications station. The screens were mostly dark. No traffic from North America. No traffic from Europe or Asia or anywhere on the surface. 41 days of silence. The last real transmission from the ground had been a military emergency channel out of Colorado. Short, static heavy. The voice on it had been a woman, and she had been reading coordinates into a recorder like she already knew no one would answer in time. Then, the channel went dead. Voss had played that recording 11 times. He had stopped playing it for days ago. Sat down and pulled up the signal analysis that WREN had flagged 6 hours earlier. Ren was the station's onboard AI, a flat voice with no personality, which Voss had come to appreciate. It did not offer comfort, it gave data. The signal was coming from the dark side of the moon. It had been broadcasting for at least 72 hours before WREN isolated it from the background noise. It was not random. It repeated in a structured sequence, a series of prime numbers followed by what looked like a coordinate string. Someone had built that signal to be found by someone who knew what they were looking for. Voss stared at the screen for a long time. He pulled up the crew list on the adjacent monitor. 41 names. It added notes next to most of them. Combat trained, medical, engineering. He stopped on one name near the bottom. Calduran, age 16, no military designation. The note next to his name just said, Exchange program, stranded. The kid was currently in the lower bay running calculations on the station's orbital decay. Nobody had asked him to do that. He had just started doing it on his own 3 weeks ago, and his numbers had been more accurate than the automated systems. Voss closed the crew list. He walked to the medical bay where Dr. Nora Fitch was working at a lab table, covered in sample containers and data tablets. She did not look up when he entered. Her eyes were fixed on a display showing a molecular diagram that meant nothing to Voss. He asked her if she had anything new. She stopped. She set down the instrument she was holding. She turned to look at him with an expression he had not seen on her face before. It was not fear. It was something colder than fear. She said the Lethis strain did not evolve on its own. The structure was too clean. The progressions were engineered. Every pathway had been deliberately designed to prevent immune response. She had checked her results 6 times. Someone built it, she said. Someone made this. Voss said nothing for a moment. He looked at the molecular diagram on her screen, at the clean, precise lines of something that had killed most of the human race. Then he walked back to the observation window and looked down at Earth one more time. He had 4 people left who could fight. He had one doctor telling him the end of the world was not an accident. And somewhere on the dark side of the moon, someone was broadcasting a signal and waiting. He went to find Calduran. The shuttle had no name. Voss had not bothered to give it one. It was a cargo hauler, gray and battered, with a cracked heat shield on the port side that Pat Sully had sealed with compression foam and a prayer. It seated 12. 8. Voss had brought 8 people, which left enough room for the equipment cases stacked along the rear wall. Calduran sat in the co-pilot seat and did not speak. He had not spoken much since Voss told him where they were going. He just pulled up the nav charts and started working. His hands moved fast across the screen. He was precise. It's no wasted motion. Voss watched him from the corner of his eye and said nothing. The moon filled the forward viewport as they crossed the Terminator line into the dark side. The surface down there was black and broken. No lights. No movement. It's just craters and shadow and silence that had been there for 4 billion years before humans showed up and would be there long after. Voss keyed the comms. Ren was still broadcasting the signal's coordinates back to them from Ironhold. The source was a specific point in the Copernicus Basin region, deep in a depression that would not be visible from any standard orbital scan. Whoever built that facility had picked the location carefully. Zoli brought the shuttle down through a narrow descent corridor that Cal had plotted. The landing was rough. Metal scraping rock, dust rising in the lights. When the engines cut, the silence was immediate and total. Voss stood up and looked at the people behind him. Sergeant Lou Briggs sat closest to the door, a demolitions pack across his knees, half his face covered in burned scar tissue that had healed badly years ago. He had not asked any questions before boarding. He had just picked up his pack and walked to the shuttle. Next to him was Keiko Strand, former Black Ops, no rank now, just a woman with short dark hair and calm eyes that had seen enough that nothing much moved them anymore. Owen Park sat across from her, already reviewing schematics on a hand tablet, his intelligence analyst brain working the problem before they even had a problem. The rest were support. Voss trusted them enough to bring them, not enough to put them up front. He opened the hatch. The facility entrance was cut into the basin wall. Heavy blast doors, military grade, sealed but not powered down. There was a light above the door. A single green light was on. Voss raised his weapon and moved forward. The blast doors opened before he reached them. A man stood in the entrance. He was in his 60s, military bearing, gray hair cut short. He wore a uniform that had not been standard issue for 20 years. He had a sidearm on his hip that he had not drawn. Behind him were soldiers, at least 10 visible weapons up, pointed directly at Voss and his team. Voss recognized the man. Colonel Grant Hale, former director of Earth Defense Strategic Command, a man Voss had last seen across a tribunal table 8 years ago when Voss had testified against him and watched him walk free anyway. Hale looked at Voss with no surprise at all, like he had been expecting him. Like the signal had been placed specifically so Voss would follow it. Said Voss should lower his weapon and come inside. He said there was a lot to explain in very little time. Voss did not lower his weapon. He stood in the lunar dark with a gun up and 8 people behind him and looked at the one man alive he trusted, less than silence. Then the soldier on Hale's left shifted and Voss saw the shoulder patch on his uniform. It was not a military insignia. It was something else. A design Voss had never seen before. A red circle with a single vertical line through the center. He had no idea what it meant. He stepped inside anyway. The facility went deep. Voss followed Hale through a series of corridors that had been carved directly into the lunar rock. The walls were rough in places, smooth and reinforced in others, like the construction had been rushed, and then corrected, and then rushed again. Cables ran along the ceiling in thick bundles. The lighting was harsh and white. Everything smelled like metal and recycled oxygen, and something chemical underneath that Voss could not identify. Hale walked fast and did not look back. Voss kept 2 steps behind him and watched every doorway they passed. Lou Briggs was at his shoulder. Keiko had taken the rear without being asked. The soldiers from Hale's unit surrounded the group but had lowered their weapons after the first corridor. That was not reassurance. That was just confidence. They were inside Hale's facility, deep in rock, on the dark side of the moon. There was nowhere to go. The briefing room was large and cold, a long metal table with screens on every wall. Maps of the inner solar system. Orbital paths. Population data with most of the numbers crossed out or replaced with zeros. 31 people were already seated or standing when Voss walked in. Engineers, analysts, a few faces that looked like they had not been outside this room in weeks. Hale stood at the head of the table and waited until everyone was still. Then he told them about Project Morrow. He was direct about it. No easing in, no apology in his voice. Project Morrow had been a black-budget program running inside Earth Defense for 11 years. Its stated purpose was contingency planning for ecological and population collapse scenarios. Its actual development had gone further than anyone outside the program was supposed to know. The Lethus strain was its final product, not a defense weapon, not a deterrent, a reset mechanism. Engineered to move fast, target broadly, and leave infrastructure intact. Someone had stolen the deployment key 18 months ago and used it. The room was completely silent while Hale spoke. Voss watched the faces around the table. Some of them already knew this. Most did not. A woman near the far end pressed both hands flat on the table and stared at the surface like she was trying to hold herself together through the metal. Hale pulled up a map of Mars on the main screen. The Remnant Council had been operating from a facility outside Hela's basin for 2 years. They had gone early, before the outbreak, which meant they had known what was coming. They had ships, weapons, food production, and soldiers. They also had a second-generation version of the Lethis strain that was faster and more stable than the first. Their plan was simple. Any survivor population that did not submit to Remnant authority within 40 days would receive a demonstration of what the second strain could do. Hale said they needed to build an army and hit Mars before the deadline closed. Voss said nothing through the whole briefing. He sat with his arms on the table and listened, and kept his face flat. Owen Park was writing everything down beside him. Calderan had been left outside the briefing room with 2 of Hale's soldiers watching him, which Voss had not liked but had not argued about yet. After Hale finished, people started talking at once. Logistics, numbers, ship capacity. Voss stood up and walked out. He found a corridor junction 20 meters from the briefing room and stood there alone. He pulled out his datapad. He had accessed Hale's personal file transfer logs during the shuttle descent, a quiet breach that Owen had run without leaving a trace. He read the entry again. 6 months before the Lethis outbreak, a large encrypted data package had been sent from Hale's personal terminal to a receiving address registered to a facility on Mars. Voss stood in the cold white corridor and read the timestamp 3 times. Then he heard boots behind him and put the pad away before he turned around. It was Hale. The older man looked at him without expression and asked if Voss had any questions about the briefing. Voss said no. Hale nodded slowly and started to walk away. Then he stopped. While turning around, he said that Voss had always been the best field commander he had ever seen. He said that was why he had sent the signal specifically to Ironhold, because he needed someone who would not hesitate when the time came. He walked away before Voss could answer. Voss stood alone in the corridor and felt the weight of that sentence settle over him like something cold. Hale had not said he needed someone he could trust. It said he needed someone who would not hesitate. Those were not the same thing. The frigate appeared on the tracking screen at 0340. Owen Park saw it first. He was pulling a double shift in the facility's monitoring bay, which was a habit from before the world ended, and one he had not broken since. He stared at the contact for 30 seconds to make sure it was real. Then he walked fast to Voss's quarters and knocked hard on the door. Voss was already awake. He had the tracking data on his own pad in 2 minutes. The vessel was holding a slow lunar orbit, no weapon signature, broadcasting a Remnant Council identification code openly like it had nothing to hide. It was frigate class. Enough firepower to crack the facility open if it wanted to. It had not fired. It was not maneuvering for position. It was just circling and broadcasting and waiting. Hall wanted it destroyed immediately. He came into the monitoring base still, buttoning his jacket, took one look at the screen, and told his weapons officer to get targeting solutions ready. Voss put his hand on the weapons officer's shoulder before the man could move and told him to stand down. The 2 men looked at each other across the room. The soldiers along the walls watched and did not move. Hale said every Remnant vessel was a threat. Voss said, "A threat does not announce itself and then sit still." The frigate hailed them 4 minutes later. Voss answered, before Hale could stop him. The man on the screen was young, mid-30s, clean uniform, the kind of steady voice that came from training and not from actual comm. He said his name was Commander Roy Tanner. He said he was alone on the bridge. He said he had locked his own crew in the lower decks and diverted helm control to his station specifically so he could make this contact without interference. He said he wanted to come in. Hale said nothing. His face was unreadable. Tanner talked fast. He'd grown up in Portland. He had a sister who had been in Brisbane when the outbreak started, and he had not heard from her since day 3. He had joined the Remnant Council 8 months ago because after losing nearly everyone he knew, he had believed their argument that the reset was necessary. But what came next could be better if it was controlled. He said he had believed that for about 4 months before he started seeing what controlled actually looked like up close. He had spent the last 3 months building something into the Remnant fleet's communication architecture, a fragmentation sequence buried inside the standard command relay. If triggered, it would cause 3 of their vessels to receive contradictory orders simultaneously, creating a command crisis at the worst possible moment in an engagement. He had the facility schematics for the Hellas Basin installation, guard rotations, internal layouts, the location of the second strain storage. Hale looked at Voss. For the first time since they had arrived, something moved behind the older man's eyes. Not gratitude. Not relief. Calculation. Voss brought Tanner in. The defector came through the docking bay in a gray flight suit, with his hands visible and his eyes moving carefully around the room without looking afraid. Voss watched him walk. Tanner had the movement of someone who had made a decision and finished being uncertain about it. That was either genuine or it was the best performance Voss had ever seen. Dr. Fitch ran the medical check. Clean. No trackers. No biological markers. Voss sat across from Tanner in a small side room with Lou Briggs standing at the door and went through the intelligence package for 2 hours. The schematics were detailed. The guard rotation data was current within 72 hours. Fragmentation sequence was real. Owen Park verified the architecture and the remnant communication code and came back looking like he had not expected it to actually be there. It was all exactly what Tanner had said it was. Voss went back to the main bay and told Hale the intelligence was solid. Hale nodded and said good. He said they would move forward with the fleet assault as planned, using Tanner's data to improve their targeting. He said it was time to stop running small operations and hit Mars with everything they had. Voss said a fleet assault would not work. 30 ships against 4. Though the math did not change no matter how good the intelligence was. Hale said the math was his concern. Voss said he had a different plan. Small team. Fast insertion. Destroy the second strain directly and deploy anchor into the Mars atmospheric system at the same time. Remove the weapon and the leverage in a single operation. Then the fleet engagement became winnable because the Remnant Council would have nothing left to threaten anyone with. Hale looked at him for a long moment. Then he said no. He said they would do it his way. He pulled rank cleanly and without raising his voice and walked out of the room. Voss stood there and breathed slowly. Then he thought about the data transfer. The encrypted package from Hale's terminal to Mars, 6 months before the outbreak. He had been carrying that information like a stone in his chest for days, waiting for the right moment. He decided the moment was now, called a full assembly. He stood at the front of the room with both crews present and laid it out. The timestamp, the file size, the receiving address on Mars. He read it directly from the pad without commentary. The room went very quiet. Hale's response was immediate and controlled. He said it was a sanctioned operation. A disinformation package sent to a known infiltration network inside the remnant structure. He said it had been authorized at the highest levels of Earth Defense Command. He pulled documentation from his own files and put it on the screen. Transfer authorization. Command signatures. Full paper trail. The documentation was real. Voss could see that. Owen Park checked it beside him and gave a small nod that meant he could not find a fault in it. Hale was cleared in front of both crews, and the echo of the tribunal 8 years ago was so present in that room that Voss could almost hear it. He backed down. He had no choice. He walked to the back of the room and stood next to Keiko Strand. She leaned close and spoke quietly without looking at him. She said she had been watching Hale's biometrics on the room monitor during the whole exchange. Pulse, micro-expression, respiratory pattern. She said Hale had held steady through every part of it except one sentence. When he said the package had been authorized at the highest levels, his biometric profile jumped for 3 seconds and then flattened again. Voss asked which 3 seconds. Keiko said exactly the 3 seconds when Hale used the word authorized. Voss looked across the room at Hale, who was already talking to his senior officers like the assembly had never happened. He looked at Tanner, sitting alone in a chair near the wall, watching everything. Tanner looked up and met his eyes through the crowd. He held the look for a moment, then he mouthed 2 words through the noise in the distance between them. Voss read his lips and felt something drop in his chest. The words were, he knew. Voss did not sleep. He sat in the monitoring bay for the rest of the night, with the door sealed and the lights low, and went through everything he had. The transfer log. Keiko's biometric read. Tanner's 2 words. He laid it out in sequence on the table in front of him like pieces of something broken that he was trying to fit back together. By 0500, he had a shape. Not proof. Not enough to take into a room and win. At a shape. He went to find Tanner. The defector was in the quarantine bay, awake, sitting on the edge of the cot with his hands clasped between his knees. He looked up when Voss came in, and did not look surprised. Like he had been waiting for this conversation since he docked. Voss sat across from him and said nothing at first. He let the silence sit. Nice. Tanner filled it. He said Hale had been in contact with the Remnant Council's senior logistics division for at least 14 months before the outbreak. Not through back channels. Through a direct, secure line that only 3 people in Earth Defense had the clearance to operate. Tanner had seen the access records himself while inside the Remnant communication architecture. He had not understood what he was looking at the first time. The second time he had understood exactly what he was looking at and had said nothing for 6 weeks because he did not know who to tell. And staying alive felt more important than being right. Voss asked him why he had not led with that information when he defected. Tanner said because the first thing Hale would have done is put him in the ground. Voss looked at him for a long moment. Then he stood up and left. He had 36 hours before Hale finalized the fleet assault plan and locked everyone into his timeline. 36 hours to build something outside Hale's authority that could actually work. He started with Lou Briggs. He found him in the equipment bay stripping and reassembling a charge pack with the methodical focus of a man who had learned that keeping his hands busy was the only thing that kept everything else quiet. Voss told him what he needed. What? Briggs set down the charge pack and asked one question. He asked if it was a one-way trip. Voss said he did not think so. Briggs picked the charge pack back up and said he was in. Keiko was next. She was already packed. Owen Park said yes before Voss finished the sentence, then immediately started pulling Mars facility schematics onto his tablet and cross-referencing them with Tanner's data. His hands were moving fast. He had the look of someone who had been waiting for a real problem to solve. Kel Duran was the argument. Voss found him in the corridor outside the navigation room and told him he was not coming. Cal did not raise his voice. He did not argue with emotion. He pulled up the Mars orbital insertion calculations on his pad and showed Voss the 3 different flight paths. He had already plotted for exactly this kind of operation. He pointed to the numbers quietly and let them speak. The defense grid around the Hellas Basin facility had 2 windows. Both required approach angles that nobody else in the combined crew could calculate in real time under pressure. Voss looked at the numbers for a long time. Said if anything went wrong, Cal was the first one on the extraction vehicle. Cal said fine. Voss added Tanner to the team on a knife's edge of trust, and nothing more. He watched the man's face when he told him. Tanner nodded once and asked what he could carry. They had the team. 6 people. Enough to move fast, and not enough to make noise. Then Hale called him to the command room. Voss walked in and found Hale standing at the main table with 2 of his senior officers and a relaxed expression that did not match the room. Hale said he had reviewed the infiltration concept and changed his mind. He said a small advanced team going in ahead of the fleet was actually a sound tactical option. Said he wanted to support it fully. Said he was assigning 2 additional soldiers to the team. Corporal Dana Ewell and Sergeant Pete Morrow. Both experienced, both vetted by his personal staff. Voss said he appreciated the support. He walked out and kept his face flat until he was alone in the corridor. Then he stopped and stood very still. Hale had fought the infiltration plan in front of 2 full crews. He had pulled rank and shut it down completely. Now, 12 hours later, with no new information and no change in the tactical picture, he had reversed course and was adding his own soldiers to the team. Voss ran it forward in his head. Hale knowing about the operation was a problem he had already accepted. Hale's soldiers on the team was a different kind of problem, the kind that did not announce itself until it was too late. He went to find Keiko. She listened without interrupting when he finished. She asked him one question. She asked if he wanted her to find out who Ewell and Morrow reported to inside Hale's command structure. He said yes. They came back in 40 minutes with a single piece of information. Both soldiers had been personally transferred into Hale's unit 9 months ago from a division that had not officially existed in any Earth defense record until Tanner's intelligence package named it as the Remnant Council's primary military liaison office. Voss stood in the corridor with that information and did not move for a long time. He could pull the team, abort the whole operation. But without the mission, the second strain reached Mars's atmospheric processors in 22 days, and nothing any of them did after that point would matter. He made his decision. They would go, all 6 of them, plus Yule and Morrow. And he would watch those two every step of the way, from the moment they boarded the shuttle to the moment the charges blew. He went to brief the team. He did not tell them about Yule and Morrow, not yet. He needed them focused, and he needed those two soldiers calm and unsuspecting, until the moment he understood exactly what Hale had sent them to do. 3 hours before launch, Dr. Fitch found him in the corridor outside the medical bay. She was holding a compressed dispersal unit the size of a backpack. She said Anchor was stable, not perfect, but stable enough. She held it out to him. He took it. She held on for 1 second longer than she needed to before she let go. She said, "Bring it back if you can." She looked at him directly and said that was not what she meant. She meant bring yourself back. Voss said he would try. He walked toward the docking bay and did not look back. Behind him, the monitoring screen on the wall updated silently. A new contact had appeared at the edge of the Mars approach corridor. Then another. Then 6 more in quick succession. The remnant fleet was moving. The descent into Mars took 40 minutes and felt like falling into a furnace. Cal had plotted the approach through the defense grid's narrowest window, a corridor between 2 automated tracking stations that overlapped. They had to be through before the window closed. Cal counted down, his voice steady and low, calling each marker. They made it through with 4 minutes to spare. The cargo shell hit the upper atmosphere, and the heat came fast. The hull creaked and popped. Nobody spoke. Briggs sat with his demolitions pack on his lap, eyes closed. Tanner watched descent telemetry on a small screen. Yule and Morrow sat together near the rear, silent. Voss watched them, saying nothing. They set down 3 kilometers from the Hellas Basin facility. The ramp dropped, and the cold hit immediately. Mars air, thin and sharp, with a chemical bite. The sky was dark rust and empty. Only wind moved across rock. Voss sent Briggs up front. Keiko held the rear. Owen ran navigation. Tanner moved in the middle, Voss behind him. Yule and Morrow fell into position without being directed, briefed in advance. Voss filed that away, kept moving. The facility appeared out of the rock face like it had grown there, low profile, reinforced concrete and steel plate. 2 guards at the outer entrance, both armed, facing outward. Briggs took position data from Owen. Briggs circled wide with a timed charge on the external power relay. When it blew, the outer lights died. Both guards moved toward the relay box on instinct. He did not make it far. The team was inside in under 90 seconds. The interior was colder than outside. White corridors, clean and functional, built to last. Voices somewhere deeper in the structure, distant. The guard rotation Tanner had provided was holding. They moved fast through the first 2 checkpoints, using Tanner's access codes, which still worked. Either the council had not burned them, or the update had not reached this facility. Voss did not trust either explanation, but kept moving. They were 40 meters from the bioweapon storage bay. When the world came apart, Corporal Yule stepped out of position and put her sidearm against the back of Owen Park's head. She told Voss to stop moving. Her voice was flat and professional, no anger in it, just a job. Pete Morrow had already moved 2 steps to the side, and his hand was on a panel in the wall, silent alarm panel. He had the cover open. Voss went still. Beside him, he felt Briggs go rigid. Donner stood completely motionless. Then a set of blast doors at the far end of the corridor opened with a hydraulic hiss, and a woman walked through. She was in her 50s, composed, wearing a dark command jacket with no insignia. She walked like someone who owned the floor. She stopped 10 meters away and looked at Voss with an expression that was almost respectful. She said her name was Director Petra Cole. She said he had come a very long way. Then she said that Colonel Hale had told her he would come. She let that land for a moment. She looked at Voss steadily and said Hale had also asked her to pass along a message. She said he wanted Voss to know he was sorry it had ended this way. Voss dropped. He hit the floor the same instant he moved, and the shot that Yule fired went over him and struck the wall behind his shoulder. The corridor exploded into noise. Briggs was already moving before the echo died. He came off the wall low and fast, and put Pete Morrow down before Morrow's hand reached the alarm panel. 1 shot. Clean. Morrow hit the floor and did not move. Yul swung her weapon toward Voss, and Tanner stepped into the line. The shot hit Tanner in the left side. He made no sound, just folded and went down hard against the corridor wall. One hand pressed flat against the wound, his face tight and pale. Keiko put Yul on the ground 4 seconds later from the rear of the group. It was not gentle. Cole was already moving back through the blast doors. Voss was on his feet before Tanner finished falling. He looked at Tanner for 1 second. Tanner was breathing. His eyes were open. Voss told Briggs to hold the corridor and ran. The blast doors were still closing. He got through with half a second to spare. Cole was running down a secondary passage to the left. Voss went right, toward the bioweapon bay. Because that was the mission, and Cole without the weapon was just a woman in a dark jacket. Owen came through behind him, moving fast despite the graze across his shoulder from a round that had come off the wall in the first seconds of the firefight. He pulled up the facility layout on his wrist unit and pointed left at the next junction, then right. Then a heavy door with a manual lock that Owen bypassed in 40 seconds while Voss stood with his back to the wall and watched both ends of the corridor. The bioweapon bay was exactly what Tanner had described, long and cold and clean. Rows of pressurized canisters and sealed racks, each one tagged and numbered.
Oh.
The release system was a central console with a hardwired trigger mechanism. Owen went straight to it and started tearing it apart. His hands moved fast, pulling boards and cutting relay lines, methodical and focused like the pain in his shoulder was happening to someone else. Cal came through the door behind them, with the anchor unit across his back. He found the atmospheric intake valve on the far wall, checked the connection points against the diagrams on his pad, and linked the dispersal unit in under 3 minutes. He looked at Voss and nodded once. Voss told him to open it. Cal opened it. The hiss of the anchor compound entering the ventilation system was quiet and steady. Cal watched the pressure gauge on the unit and said it was holding, said it was moving. Briggs came over comes. His voice was tight. He said Cole had gotten to a secondary terminal somewhere in the facility. She was trying to trigger a remote release on a personal emergency canister, a backup dispersal unit that was not in the main storage. He said Keiko had gone after her. Voss told Owen to finish destroying the release system and stay with Cal. Then he went back into the corridor. I found them in the atmospheric intake room at the end of the East Passage. Cole had the canister in both hands and was moving toward the main intake port. Keiko was between her and the port with blood on her face from somewhere and nothing in her hands except intention. The fight was short and brutal and Keiko did not come out of it clean. Cole went down. The canister rolled across the floor and stopped against the wall, sealed, intact. Keiko sat down on the floor against the wall next to it and breathed hard. Voss picked up the canister and looked at her. She waved him off. She said she was fine. Said it in a way that meant she was not fine, but she was not dying either and he should go do something useful. He went back to Tanner. Briggs had him propped against the wall with a compression seal over the wound. Tanner's color was bad, but his eyes were clear. He asked if it worked. Voss told him Cole was down and the second strain was destroyed and anchor was in the ventilation system and moving through the facility. Tanner closed his eyes for a moment. Just a moment. Then he opened them again. Said he had never wanted any of this. Voss said he knew. Tanner said Cole was not always what she became. He said that did not excuse anything. Said he just wanted someone to know it. Voss said nothing. He put his hand on Tanner's shoulder and kept it there. Overcomes? Keiko's voice came through hard and fast. She said the orbital situation had changed. She had been monitoring the fleet engagement from the extraction vehicle's long-range sensors. She said Hale had launched the full assault without waiting. 4 ships against the remnant fleet. The numbers were what they had always been. But Tanner's fragmentation sequence had triggered inside the remnant command relay, and 3 of their vessels had turned on each other in the first minutes of the engagement. 2 more had broken off to respond to the facility breach alert from the surface. The remnant fleet was not broken, but it was fracturing. Then she stopped talking for 3 seconds. Then she said that Hale's flagship had changed course. It was no longer targeting the remnant fleet. It had dropped into low Mars orbit and was locking weapons on the extraction vehicle. Voss stood up. He told Owen to get the comms array in the facility's east tower running. Owen said he needed 9 minutes. Voss told him he had 9 minutes. Owen had it running in 8. Voss sat down in front of the array and opened every channel available. Fleet frequency, moon station, every receiver in the inner solar system that was still operational. He did not think about what he was going to say. He just started talking, gave them everything, sequenced and direct. The Lethus strain and Project Morrow. The Remnant Council and the second strain. Hale's transfer record and the timeline it created. Tanner's defection, Yule, and Morrow. The deal Hale had been building for months. Last survivors handed over as a peace offering in exchange for his own position in the new order. He read coordinates and timestamps and the encrypted file headers that Owen had verified. He kept his voice flat and gave them no interpretation, just the record. He talked for 6 minutes. Then he stopped and waited. On the Resolute, Hale's weapons officer locked him out of the firing controls 60 seconds after the broadcast ended. The XO relieved Hal of command under military code and put him in a cell somewhere in the ship he used to own. The Remnant fleet lost cohesion within the hour. Some ships surrendered. Some ran. None of them had a weapon that worked anymore. Dr. Fitch's voice comes from Ironhold. She had been monitoring the Mars atmospheric readings in real time. She said the anchor dispersal was above projection. She said any surviving population on the Martian surface had a window now. A real one. Voss sat in the cold facility and listened to her voice and said nothing for a moment. Then he went and helped carry Tanner to the extraction vehicle. The pickup came 40 minutes later. They loaded Tanner first. Then Keiko, who refused help until Briggs simply picked up her equipment without asking and walked it up the ramp, which she allowed because arguing would have taken energy she did not have. Cal Duran was the last one up the ramp. He stopped at the top and turned and looked at the sky. Voss stopped beside him. The sky above Mars was the same dark rust it had always been. But there was debris up there now, catching what little light reached this far from the sun, and the distant shapes of ships standing down, and somewhere in all of it, the slow, invisible spread of something that might let people live. Cal asked what happened next, who rebuilt it, who decided the rules. Voss thought about Hale in a cell, about Cole on a facility floor, about a planet below them that was still turning and still looked the same from a distance no matter what had happened on the surface. He said he did not know who decided. He said it had to start with people who remembered what was lost, not people who decided the loss was acceptable. Cal said he did not know if they could actually do it, rebuild something real. From this, Voss looked at the sky for a moment. He said humans had done harder things in worse conditions with less reason to keep going. He said that was not optimism. That was just the record. Cal looked at him, then he looked back at the sky. Below the ship, at the edge of the Martian horizon, Earth was visible. Small and blue, and very far away, still there.